of what I do is attending to the needs of the sick, the dying, and the elderly. And obviously a lot of that's been curtailed during COVID. Among the things I do, so it's a lot of hospitals and nursing homes and assisted living. And among the things I do that I've developed over the years is a sensitivity training or a cultural sensitivity training with as part of hospital chaplain training programs, because they have to do multi-faith didactics and cultural sensitivity programs. So I'll go in and do everything you need to know about Jews and Judaism. Can feel comfortable serving all kinds of patients. And I do those in care facilities as well for a nursing home that might have a large Jewish population and the staff needs to know. Okay, so one of the things when I do those sessions, I always want to start out with, okay, so what are some stereotypes or things that you think you know about Jews and Judaism, positive or negative? Right, and that's usually a really good way of beginning a conversation, because invariably some of the negative stereotypes will always come out. But I always say that triggered me to say this is that as a counselor, because I tell chaplains, okay, if you take aside the things religiously you think you don't know, or that you think that Jews are a different species altogether, please know we're human beings, flesh and blood, just like you. And we have the same fears and needs and wants and that you do. So go in, and you're a pastor, go in and use your good chaplain pastoral skills and assume that you have more in common than you have than what divides you. Right. And so I would tell you, please hold on to that for yourself. Don't assume that we're some strange species that have to be treated so differently. Right? So, right, because we're not. And you've met Ula, who is awesome, right? I mean, I'm a lot like I think Ula might be a touch younger than me, but both married with kids and working spouses, and juggling our lives and our households in the same way that pretty much most women in America do, right? Right. So in any case, so just to, I always like to think that we all, with any other human being, we have more than not. So let me ask you, because when you get the one thing that you'll find out is most Jews, and rabbis double that, most Jews can talk. So in terms of being a rabbi, our sacred language is Hebrew. The word rabbi essentially means teacher. So rabbis, first and foremost, historically, we are teachers. Over the centuries, rabbis, just like priests and ministers, have evolved from, a pastoral or academic, expert on religion role to carer, right? So, and all of that encompasses what a rabbi does. So I know that one of the things that people always wonder, and maybe less so, or by the time I retire, nobody will have to ask this question anymore. So I didn't know that women could be rabbis. So the liberal movements have been ordaining women since 1973 or 72.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was ordained in 93. So I am not a trailblazer at all. There were hundreds of us. By now, there are probably a couple thousand. Jews are 2% of the world's population. So, but rabbis, when in a congregational role, you can end up being the CEO of the congregation. You can end up being the chief pastor. You are the Jewish expert, obviously, a teacher. You can fulfill all those kinds of roles. And in the world today, across the denominational spectrum of rabbis, there are rabbis who work in congregational life. There are rabbis who work in schools. There are rabbis who work in Jewish communal organizations like myself. There are rabbis who don't work in the Jewish community, who work I have a colleague in California who gave up pulpit work, and I believe he runs a shelter.
Oh, right? Wow.
And there are lots of rabbis and members of the Jewish community who work. We have in the Jewish community, we have some of our own social justice advocacy organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of rabbinic participation as well as lay people as well. So it can be the rabbi has become a very broad, there's a broad set of tasks, or I guess jobs one could have these days. I had the pleasure over the years I had my children while I started having my kids while I was in school.
Mm-hmm.
And it still is sort of unusual to see pregnant woman rabbi, now it's middle-aged woman rabbi, so I've myself and my female colleagues have also lived through lots of changes in the world and been a part of them. I will tell you one of the biggest advocacy areas of advocacy within the women clergy, and not just in the rabbinate, in the Jewish world, but all around, is pay equity. And benefits equity. When I had my children, there was no such thing as maternity leave.
Yeah.
We didn't have, rabbis didn't get maternity leave. Now they do. They sure do. And our organizations also we have a national women's rabbinic organization, and they do a lot of work on pay equity. They're doing a lot of work on sexual harassment right now. As well as advocating for many of the larger issues of the day. So let me talk a little bit about cultural considerations, because every one of these topics could go on forever. So when it comes to cultural considerations, what's most important, as I mentioned to you before, is assume that you have more in common with this Jewish person that's in front of you. Okay. The Jewish world exists within denominations, okay? From ultra-Orthodox, which are our most fundamentalist, traditional, ritually observant Jews, to the most liberal on the left. So Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox are the main denominations, and then you have plenty in between. So some of the things to understand culturally is that if you come from a religious household, and these are things that folks may never encounter in their entire life. Orthodox Jews live in such a way, and even they run the gamut from being modern, right, where women have advanced degrees and work out in the world, right, and wear pants and don't cover their hair, which are some of the traditional trappings, so to speak, right? All the way to the people who kind of like the Amish, by looking at them, oh, okay, this is fundamentally different. So, but to know, so that's one thing first to kind of notice, what kind of Jew are you dealing with? And we described how you have the way you will get at somebody's identity and how they identify Jewishly, right? And the one kind of culturally sensitive step further to ask is not just do you identify religiously or culturally, but if you identify religiously, what are the practices that are most important to you? And because some of those practices may end up informing the work you do with them, but it also can inform how you interact with them. And here's an example. So if in the traditional Orthodox community, there is a specific division between men and women, okay? And that men and women who are not related to one another, they're not married to one another, but they do not touch in public, meaning they don't shake hands. And because there are laws of what are called modesty. So women don't wear pants, women only dress like women, men only dress like, in stereotypical male clothes. There's no physical contact. Now, if it's a male doctor or let's do it the right way, a woman doctor who has a male patient, obviously that's a medical situation and it's going to be, that's fine. But, you know, I know when I meet an Orthodox colleague of an opposite gender, I know not to reach my hand out, right? Because I know they're not going to take it. So there's a lot of nodding and smiling, right? But, you know, says the handshakes are going away anyway, so we're going to get rid of that problem. But it also may be that as a woman, if you've got a male, he might be uncomfortable being with you alone in a room without somebody related to him, right? It's not a statement about you.
Yeah.
Else is about where he's coming from. So those gender things are important to know if you're with a traditionally oriented Jew. And, you know, if you may end up, may end up being working with someone, if you come from an Orthodox family and you come out as gay, and that obviously, that may be a reason why you're in therapy, there's going to be a whole lot of issues that stem from your religious upbringing and your family's religious practices and community place impact. So when in doubt, ask. When in doubt, ask. So those are some of the things to understand. I think with most Jews that you will encounter in most situations. Look, Jews are typically very family oriented, although now has lots of different definitions. It's really important for families like everybody in the world to get together at holidays. And, you know, we do have a lot of holidays. You know, my kids I have a couple of kids who work out in the rest of the world and not in the Jewish world, and a hell of a time explaining, oh, you have another holiday? Really? You have to. So, but this is how we live our existence. So those are the kinds of things that that you may find that are really important. There may be some, there are some stereotypes as to how Jewish families function, right? That we are all functional and that we come from these wonderful nuclear families where everybody gets along and that there's no estrangement and that everybody is happy. We all get together for the holidays. And there's a lot of shame in admitting that, whoa, what's happening behind my doors isn't what you think about outside of them. Right? And the same with substance abuse, with alcoholism and addiction. We've got plenty of that in the Jewish community. We have plenty of domestic violence, right? So we don't assume that we don't have that stuff.
Yeah.
We do, right? So I think that those are some of the main things. You know, one other thing too, depending on what kind of community you end up in, and I'll be curious, I think a lot of us are curious to see how that's going to change once we hit the pandemic or once the end of the pandemic and we move away from it, is the clannishness and the degree to which, because there's this perception that we all know each other. And some of it is true because it's a standard practice that when two Jews meet each other, you know, like if my husband and I are on vacation, right? And this has happened, you know, we're on a cruise boat, and which we will never, ever do again, by the way, ever. You know, you'd meet up with the Jews and somehow we would know, y'all kind of know who they are. We all do have this, it is funny that we somehow know, identify, but we don't talk about that. Like, and you can't ever say that, right? But we do sometimes have this sense as to, oh, they're Jewish, right? But we'll engage in conversations with people and invariably keep talking until we find a way in which we are connected. Like our kids knew each other at camp, or my sister and their brother-in-law went to college together.
Oh, wow.
We'll do that stuff, right? So I can give you this really funny vignette. My oldest daughter, we have 3 daughters. Our oldest daughter is a lawyer. She was in law school. She went to Vanderbilt. She grew up here in Atlanta. She went to the University of Florida for college. She was at Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt has, in the law school, among the students, it's a very small number of Jewish students. The faculty is overwhelmingly Jewish, but the student group is really small. And she describes to me how of course, all the Jews in the law school knew each other pretty quickly. They all met each other. You know, I think there might have been a Jewish student association, so of course they met each other. But she had this happen more than once, where she'd be talking to one of the other Jewish students within earshot of some of the other students, and the two of them would figure out pretty quickly that maybe they went to camp together, right? Or on some youth group trip where there were thousands of kids from around the country, some youth convention or something, and they were all there, right? And more than once, my daughter described this to me, that people would say to them after they discovered this connection, how do you do that? How do you do that, right? We're a small person. I think there's maybe 4 million Jews in the United States.
Wow.
Right, out of 300 million in the country, right? We're a small percentage of the population, but yeah, we know each other. All right, so that's a curious thing. So from a counseling point of view, even if somebody wants to keep something confidential, there can be a lot of shame and worry about things getting out, because they just do. They just do. I mean, at Jewish Family Service, we have 2 different entrances for folks if they're concerned, if they want to, we have a clinical entrance, which is kind of around the back of the building, direct everybody else towards the other entrance, right? And that's a way of of helping protect people's privacy. So there's that thing out there that we're all going to know each other. But the other, on the flip side too, there's a generosity as well. Many of our foundational teachings and texts that we all follow, because they're part of what everybody else calls the Old Testament, which is taking care of the poor, the widow, the orphan. By the way, we don't call it the Old Testament. It's just our Bible.
Oh, wow.
We don't, right? Because Christians have the New Testament, which for them supplanted the Old Testament. We don't call it that. It's just our Bible. I know, fun fact, right?
Yes.
But that we take those texts literally, which teach us to take care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan. So giving charity, not just in the Jewish community, but at large, Kippur, the holiest day of the year, historically, there has been a food drive, because we read a text from Isaiah that day, which tells us to take care of, that day on Yom Kippur in Atlanta for many, many, many years, historically when you come to services on Yom Kippur, you also bring a bag of food to donate to the Atlanta Food Pantry, right? So that social justice, that giving, at most of our Jewish holidays, there is part of the observance that requires us to make a donation. Kind. And again, most of them they're not always in the Jewish community. Jewish services where I work, we are called Jewish Family and Career Services. We have clinical services, we have older adult services, career services. We don't, 40% of our clients are Jewish.
Oh, that's a shock.
So we serve everybody. Yeah, we serve everybody, right? So that's very much part and parcel. So in terms of, there's a website, it's called myjewishlearning.com, pretty easy to remember. And it's a wonderful clearinghouse for pretty much anything and everything you would need direction on in the Jewish world. So if you're like, what do Jews say about the afterlife? What do Jews, what are some of the practices around death and dying or birth or what? So, okay. I think that I think on the part of many, many Jews, you'll find a willingness and an openness to share. Now, the other thing to know about the American Jewish community is that the vast majority of American Jews are unaffiliated with synagogues. They are decreasing, like in the Christian world, right? Decreasingly affiliated with synagogues. That doesn't mean they're not practicing as Jews. But the institutions are changing, let's put it that way. But in the Jewish world, we have schools, we have parochial schools, day schools, K through 12 in all the denominations. There are Jewish studies programs at most major universities around the country. including UGA. There's a master's in Jewish studies. And, you know, we have American seminaries, and there are summer camps, youth groups, women's organizations, men's organizations. Many of them are for social, many of them are advocacy organizations. One organization called the National Council for Jewish Women, since its inception in the early part of the 20th century, has been a, many of these, I don't know if you know this part of American history, but the settlement houses that existed around the turn of the century, the turn of the 20th century, when waves of immigration came to the United States, these houses, in addition to people living there, there were acculturation centers, and acculturation not in a coercive way, but as a way of helping people integrate into America, teaching them English, helping them, you know, providing them with social services and things like that. Some of the roots of some of the Jewish women's organizations today are found there in the settlement movement.
Wow.
So since the inception of America, Jews have been out working for other people. Okay, it's not just, I think that's another thing to really understand about the Jewish community. We might be very clannish and insular in terms of our families and our celebrations and things like that. But when it comes to philanthropic activity, when it comes to acts of social justice, we don't just work on behalf of Jewish causes at all. I mean, one of the loudest figures in Atlanta, or among the loudest figures in Atlanta in Fair Fight and in some of the other organizations, Black Lives Matter right now, they're rabbi community and they're congregations. So we have that history. Okay. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that most Jews really care about the world they live in, not just for Jews, because we know that. When we're told to advocate on behalf of the rights of the poor and the widow and the orphan, that doesn't just mean us. You might be too young to remember, but in the early 90s, when the atrocities in Rwanda were brought to the forefront in the United States, it happened because of an organization. There's a Jewish social justice advocacy organization. Shoot, what's it called? I can think of Ruth Messenger. American Jewish Service is what it's called. But it was because of their work and their advocacy in the Jewish community that issue got brought to light. That was before we all had Facebook too, right? So Jews marched with MLK. Jewish women marched for, Jewish women were in the fights for the rights of suffragettes. So you go throughout history. There were Jews were actually some of the loudest voices in the early part of the 20th centuries with the labor movements early on, right? So I think that's something that that people don't necessarily know about, that I was always taught. I was brought up in a reform, in a liberal Jewish home. And as I'm not Orthodox, but I've become a much more traditional Jew in terms of my own personal practice. I was always taught, though, my mother always said, to be a Jew means you go out and you make the world a better place. And it's very simple. My mom was she's gone a few years. She was a woman who was not tremendously articulate and passionate on some level, somewhat misplaced sometimes. However, she taught me some very important, simple things. And I think most Jews hold by that. So advocacy organizations today, like the National Council of Jewish Women, they are very involved in women's rights campaigns and issues of reproductive justice, issues of, and I mean, today in Atlanta, obviously in Georgia, just we're working just like everybody else is.
It's so much.
Yes, it's pretty endless. It's pretty endless. A few years ago, one of my daughters was working in Washington for an organization called HIAS. That's the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. And an organization established around the turn of the century to deal with the waves of to support the waves of Jewish immigration that were coming into this country. Well, since the early part of the 20th century, we haven't had waves of Jewish immigration. Well, we did after the Holocaust. But what are they doing now? Well, they're supporting the rights of the Somalis and the South Americans. And I mean, the organization is still working on behalf of immigrant rights. Very few of them now are Jewish, but that's still their mission. That hasn't changed. So I think that, if you want to talk about advocacy in the Jewish community, go to any synagogue website, particularly some of the liberal movements. I can give you one, like in Atlanta, the Temple is one of our larger
Yes.
synagogues. Okay, so if every liberal synagogue, I can't speak to the Orthodox synagogues, but every liberal synagogue has a social justice committee or department.
Oh, wow.
Right. So they're doing things like they're doing smaller things like cleaning up the cemetery sections in that, that have community members in them, to marching in the organizing to make sure there's representation at the Gay Pride Parade, or down at all the rallies of late, all through COVID. And so advocacy, and I think, it's very cliche, but Hillary Clinton's statement, women's rights are human rights, it's like everybody's rights are important. And I don't think individual Jews will prioritize where they want their advocacy time to lie. Like, for instance, I recently, when I was looking to make some donations in the past year, my husband and I, we try to do our giving every year. And I actually looked at the number of Jewish versus non-Jewish organizations we gave to, and we still give very heavily in the Jewish community, because nobody else is. I mean, meaning outside the Jewish community, we do support ourselves, and we do, but but the number of secular organizations it was parity, because you have to. So again, I think that, individual Jews will have their preferences as to which rights are the most important. And there are certainly across the political spectrum, that's another thing not to assume about Jews, that we're all liberal Democrats, because unfortunately we are not. Sorry if I offended anybody watching this, right? We are not. Many of us, there are many in our community who are followers of the former president, and want small government and don't want to really live out their Jewish values in that way. So we have that too. Let me say a word about Israel, because the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, is considered by the vast majority of Jews as our homeland. This is our ancestral homeland that was designated for us by God to Abraham in the Bible. We read that story and we hold by it. It is our historical homeland. In 1948, when we were allowed back, remember, historically, the temple was destroyed. The first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE, and we were exiled. We came back under the Persian Empire. The second temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. We don't use AD, by the way. We use CE, AD after divinity. Right? We use CE Common Era. Wow. Well, that which should make sense. Yes. It should make sense. We don't count from Jesus. We don't. Yeah. So historically, we were exiled until Israel was established again as a modern state in 1948. And I won't talk about all the political forces that led to it. Many American Jews have family that live there. We do. Many American Jews have traveled there more than once. Many of us have lived there for a chunk of time. Many of us have sent our kids there. So for many Jews, there is an inherent ownership and symbiosis, I think. I'm an American citizen. I don't have dual citizenship. I don't have dual loyalties, but I have a great affection and connection for the state of Israel as my homeland. And I know as a Jew, for when I have lived there, because I was blessed to be able to spend a year living there through my, that in my early 20s, it was probably one of the best years of my life. I wasn't.
A great experience.
It was really fun. It was the best. But to have a whole country where it's on your schedule, before the Sabbath, the whole country shuts down.
Wow.
Because they go according to the Jewish calendar,
Yeah.
right? Sunday's a regular work day. And so to be in a country where it's tailor-made for you was an extraordinary experience. And to
Mm-hmm.
the language of Hebrew, which is what we read in the Bible, because we read it in its original with translation,
Mm-hmm.
you need it. But so in any case, we the state of Israel and my husband's family, much of it is there. Much of his family is there. So many Jews have a very strong connection. And I would say from a cultural sensitivity viewpoint, don't assume that they are to the right or to the left or believe, all Jews in Israel are not the crazy extremes that you see on the news. That's why they make news. So therapists, counselors certainly know how to not make assumptions and judgments based on just what you know surfacely. So
Mm-hmm.
I think those are some of the things to know about modern Jews today.
Yeah.
What
I
else can
think you did a great job of like highlighting that you guys are human like anyone else, meaning y'all have different views, different politics, and you guys still belong as one community, but y'all are still different within the community. So that's really important, I think, to highlight, because I know me being a counselor, I thought like, oh, they're all one certain way. So I need to counsel this way. I need to do this. And then when I actually start counseling with people who were Jewish, I'm like, oh, you watch the same thing I watch. You eat the same thing I eat. Like, yes. So I think it's so important to highlight that, because unfortunately, media and today's politics, we categorize and box people in certain like just limits and everything. So
correct. And I think, look, I think for anybody that's frustrating, I mean, as a Black woman, I'm sure you get it too, that people look at you and make certain assumptions about who you are and what you are and how they're expecting you to speak to them. I mean, we and I think that one of the things, truthfully, I will tell you that I've learned so forcefully, I think, in the last couple of years has just been that to really just try to drop everything you think you know. And just be open to people. And I think that for a lot of white people, it never occurred to me it never occurred to most of us what Black men have had to live through around driving in their cars. And and I will tell you that that's one of those things that has been a stunningly difficult thing to learn, right? So as a Jewish community, now that we, and it sounds kind of stupid to say now that we know, but it's one of those things where if you hurt, I hurt, like we get that. And so our inclination, because of what we've been taught, is we'll get out there and make it better, because that's not a world you want to live in. He is an oppressor, right? And that goes with so many different things. So yeah, I think that, and for me too, I really appreciate being able to dialogue with you about this. I mean, when I do these interfaith trainings, I love the questions that I get, and usually by me walking in the door, if they haven't met me before, usually right then and there, we have to say, what? You're a rabbi? Really? How's that work?
Yeah. That was some people's reactions when I said I was interviewing a rabbi, and then I said she, and everybody was like, what do you mean she? They're like, I don't think that's a rabbi. And I was like, yes, she's a rabbi.
Yeah. Just like in the, I know that in the Catholic world, please God, I'll see it in my lifetime, that women can become priests. But I just read an article the other day about women. It's a different topic, but about women in professional sports as in men's sports. Coaches, and it's like, it's a thing that's happening. I guess it was a big deal. There was a woman who was a ref at the Super Bowl, but there's any number of women refs that are professional football now, right?
Yes.
And they're coaches, and so it's fascinating to learn. I just want to get to that point where even my 29-year-old daughter, who's a lawyer, talks about women lawyers and men lawyers. It's like, can we just get to the point where we drop that?
Yes.
Like, why does it matter?
Yes. I think if your purpose is coming from good intent, it shouldn't matter your gender.
Right. Right. But the fact that we still, you have to remember, I come from a time where I could be my early years of being a rabbi, when I was either the only or one of two, maybe two women in a local meeting. Like most communities, they've had a local rabbinical council where you get together once a month or so for a meeting. And I have had this experience over and over and over again of being either the only or one of a minority of women in the room. And there's still a minority of women. But anyway, there's a lot that, there's been a lot of good change. That way.
Slow baby steps.